Hello, this is Real World Audio, and today this is our introduction to Baroque music. And I hope it will get more of a reaction than a yawn from you, my dear viewers. And of course, everyone is very interested in Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach, who is, I would say, without a shadow of a doubt, the uh, people would say the greatest musician, but that's something so shallow and empty, because today everything is greatest and best and whatnot. But we truly could define Bach as the person who understood the mathematics behind music the most. And for example, when you look at the East, at the classical music of India, which musical tradition is hundreds of years more advanced than the Western musical tradition, both in the musical complexity, in their understanding of mathematics and applying mathematics in music, and also in the development of their music instruments. So I hope some of you know already, but probably most of you don't, that the classical Indian instruments like the sitar and sharod and surbahar, those are about 500 years more advanced than the violin or the guitar. So imagine that we continue to live in the Baroque era, and they had 500 more years to develop the violin. And people like Stradivarius or Guarnieri, uh, they kept on perfecting it for generations and generations, and added on it. Then that would have reached the level of the Indian classical instruments. And sadly, in the West, it didn't happen that way. After Guarnieri and Stradivarius, really, most of the instrument making did not develop, and we have seen to that degree as it did in India. And only recently we have seen a major boom with the advent of electronic instrument and the birth of electronic music. Now we have a giant change in instrumentation, but until our age, basically the instruments remained very similar as they were in the age of Bach. However, they did still change quite a bit. So when you listen to the music of Johann Sebastian Bach, in my opinion, it makes a very big difference whether you are listening to a recording that was recorded with modern instruments like a modern violin, a modern viola, or modern woodwind instruments in a modern setting, or were they recorded on period instruments. And here I am circling back to the Telefunken Teledeck edition of Bach's works, because here we see this series, the Telefunken series, and this was started basically as a collaboration between Nicolas Harnoncourt and what's his name in the Netherlands, Gustav Leonhardt, and they actually performed Bach's works on period instruments. They got criticism for it. Why are you guys doing this? Why are you performing on period instruments? On top of that, Nicolas Harnoncourt used the same setup for choir as Bach used. So for soloist, he used boys, young boys, sopranos, and for today's taste that might seem a little bit strange, but you have to really understand that Bach wrote the music to be performed like that. And if you are listening to it with modern performers, I think you are missing quite a bit of how Bach felt, what kind of music he composed, and how he intended it to be heard. And I think that the boys choir and the boys soprano is really a crucial aspect of Bach, because Bach himself, when he was a young boy, he was a very talented singer. He was singled out and he had a position as a soloist, as a singer, as a boy soprano. So when Bach wrote his cantatas, that's why the boy soprano in it is so crucial, because he drew from personal experience. And now I want to talk a little bit more about the boy soprano in it and the young Bach, because the childhood of Bach really defined him as a person. And when you start looking into Bach, and you might notice that people say really bad things about him, that he was a really nasty person, and he was not someone you would like to meet. You would have probably a negative impression on him. But actually, when you read deeper into his life, then you see a completely different aspect to Bach, what was under this seemingly negative behavior. And when you realize that he was not by default such an aggressive person, and there were specific circumstances that brought out his unbridled anger. And when he got angry, when he got upset, he did not hold back. He had zero patience in those cases. But I will tell you what those cases were. And when people talk shite about Bach, they do not know the background. So now we circle back to the young boy soprano that Bach was. So the father of Johann Sebastian Bach and his grandfather and his ancestors were musicians. He came from a family of trained musicians. Even his uncle was a great organist. And he really, as a child, was instructed on music. His father himself taught him to play violin. And he was renowned as a phenomenal, as a fantastic performer, as a fantastic violinist. And also, sadly, during his life, he was not really recognized as a composer. People did not know him as a composer. His fame was not of that, but he was very well renowned as a singer when he was a child. And then he was renowned for his violin playing, and everyone wanted to him play the violin, and later on as for his talents as an organist, as an organ player. But as a boy, first of all, he became singled out as a soprano singing talent, and things started to look very good because he had his violin education ongoing from his father. But at the age of 10, he lost both of his parents and he became an orphan. And that's when his uncle, that organist, took him under his wings and adopted him. And also he started teaching him the art of the organ, how to play organ. And he realized that his nephew was super duper talented, and he actually got him into school. And unfortunately, there Bach, the young Bach, had a really nasty experience. I think all of you know about the Prussian education or heard of the Prussian system. which is basically describing the German education system where the teachers use extreme discipline to make the students learn. And the school where Bach went, the principal of that school took the Prussian system to a whole new level. And he enforced such level of brutality on the students that he was eventually fired. And now that's saying a lot, that in Germany you get fired for having extreme discipline. That really meant that we were talking about a person whose sadism literally knew no boundaries, because by default the education system was such that if someone would describe it to a modern person, especially in the US, they would be livid, and we would think now that to have our children exposed to such harsh punishment for like not knowing a lesson or not reciting something perfectly, it would be unheard of today. But at the era of Bach, it was every day. But this person, what he did, what the principal performed on the students, why he was expelled, we don't know. I haven't found any reference to that, but we know that the young Bach was very deeply scarred from that experience in the school. And as a result of that, later on in his life, he had absolute zero tolerance against bullies. So if there was bullying going on, he was willing to draw a sword and literally give his own life to the person who was bullied to protect the person. And he also went to extreme length when there was stupidity and unprofessionalism involved, or just plain blindside. See, he had zero tolerance against anything that did not strive for either high standards, and zero tolerance for bullying. So now that we know his background, I think now it is we have a clearer understanding of what was the motivation behind the life of Bach, behind his acts, behind his doings. And now a little bit more about his life. When he was in his 20s, that's when he made a pilgrimage. And that one, when you look in his life story, it's also told to us as a very negative story, that he was so negligent that when he traveled to this organist master to learn from him, to hear him, he extended his stay from the several weeks to several months without telling anybody, and how bad this thing is. But really this tells more about the character of Bach, that for him, when he found a master, when he found a true teacher, it was more important for him to learn from that person than to keep his job, his daytime job. And of course his employer was very pissed, but of course he did not let Bach go from his employment, because he knew that this was a crazy talented young guy in his early 20s. It was at that time that he wrote the D-moll toccata and fugue, which is the most famous organ piece of all time. And I think that's partly thanks to that great master to whom he went to visit, who was none other than Dietrich Buxtehude. And he had to, it was not just like dropping by in the neighborhood like we would go today, just hop on a train. He had to go hundreds of miles on foot to arrive there. and the territory he had to go through wasn't entirely friendly, wasn't entirely in a good shape. At the era of young Bach, we are half a century after the brutal 30 Years' War, when most of that region was in disrepair, went through just incredible carnage and destruction, and we are seeing the rebuild of basically of this northwestern Europe, and despite those dangers and hardships, Bach took the pains to travel hundreds of miles to learn from this master. And I will talk about Dietrich Buxtehude. This is some of his records that I have from him. And he was recognized as the grandmaster of Baroque, as the grandmaster of organ. And basically Bach and all other Baroque composers, they idolized Buxtehude and they wanted to be like him. And as fate happens, the two grandmasters of Bach's era, Johann Sebastian Bach and Georg Friedrich Handel, they both went to a pilgrimage to Buxtehude to see the grandmaster play, and they really had an eye-opening lesson for him. I don't know of the stories that Bach had while he was at Meister Buxtehude's organ, but I have an amazing story about Georg Friedrich Handel. When he visited Buxtehude, what was that the old master has shown them, because he visited Buxtehude with the body of his. But I will talk about that when I talk about Handel. So for now, we are back to Bach. And I think we are hitting 17 minutes right now, so I better stop. And I will continue our Bach story. So thank you for tuning in. Please stay tuned. Like if you like, subscribe if you want to, and tell your friends. Thank you. Bye bye.